The silent pain of being unwanted. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you didn't belong? Like the warmth you expected had been replaced with something colder, something unspoken? You sit down, hoping for conversation, for connection, but instead, you become an observer in a place where your presence feels more like an afterthought than a welcome guest. It's a strange thing, isn't it? When you were younger, visiting friends and family felt effortless. You'd drop by unannounced, stay for hours, share meals, laughter, stories. But as time passes, something shifts. Some doors that were once wide open now feel slightly ajar. Some invitations become less frequent. And then one day, you realize, just because you can visit someone doesn't mean you should. Because not every home is a place of warmth. Some visits leave you feeling drained, like you've overstayed even before you've sat down. Some people, even those you've known for years, no longer make space for you in the way they once did. And here's the hard truth. Forcing yourself into places where you're not valued does nothing but chip away at your spirit. But how do you recognize these places before it's too late? And more importantly, how do you protect your peace as you grow older? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share might just change the way you see your time, your relationships, and the way you choose where to go. And before we dive in, if this message resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. It helps more people find this conversation. And tell me in the comments, have you ever walked into a home and felt like you didn't belong? Type 1 if you have, or 0 if you've never experienced it. Now, let's talk about the homes you should think twice before stepping into. 1. The home where you are not genuinely welcome. The weight of that realization, isn't it? The moment you step into a space and sense, without a word being spoken, that you no longer belong. It's subtle at first, easy to dismiss. You tell yourself you're imagining things, that people get busy, that life pulls us in different directions. But deep down, you feel it. The pauses in conversation that never used to be there. The way someone's eyes scan the room instead of meeting yours. The unspoken shift from welcome guest to tolerated presence. I know that feeling all too well. There was a time in my life when I found myself holding on to friendships that had quietly faded. Not in a dramatic way, no arguments, no falling out, just the slow erosion of something that once felt solid. I had an old friend I used to visit often, the kind of friendship where time didn't seem to matter. We'd talk for hours, laugh until our sides ached, sip coffee until it went cold. But over the years, the warmth faded. The visits got shorter. The conversations felt forced, like we were flipping through an old script out of obligation. One day, as I walked through his door, I felt it. The space between us had grown too wide to cross. I wasn't stepping into a friend's home anymore. I was stepping into a place where I was no longer needed. And that realization hit me harder than I expected. I left that day with a smile, exchanged the usual pleasantries, but as I walked home, I carried something heavier than my footsteps. It took me a long time to accept that some connections aren't meant to last forever. We like to think of friendships as permanent, but the truth is, they have seasons. Some people walk with us for miles. Others are only meant to share part of the journey. And when you sense that a friendship has run its course, clinging to it doesn't bring back the past, it only prolongs the ache. I used to believe that loyalty meant holding on, but I've come to see that sometimes, the deepest respect you can show, both to yourself and to others, is knowing when to let go. And I'm not alone in that realization. Psychologists say that we often hold on to relationships out of nostalgia, out of fear of loneliness, out of the belief that if we just try harder, things will go back to how they used to be. But that's rarely how it works. Genuine connections should feel natural, not like a performance. And the people who truly value you will never make you question your place in their lives. So here's the question. If you keep leaving a place feeling lonelier than when you arrived, why do you keep going back? If you find yourself hesitating before knocking on a door, second-guessing whether you should be there at all, maybe it's time to ask yourself why you're still holding on. Letting go isn't easy, I won't pretend otherwise. But I'll tell you this. The moment I stopped knocking on the wrong doors, I found the right ones opening effortlessly. I started spending time with people who lit up when they saw me, who made space for me in their lives not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted me there. And do you know what I realized? That feeling, the one where you don't have to question if you belong, that's worth more than all the forced conversations in the world. Life is too short to be where you're only tolerated. So, if you've ever walked away from a place carrying that heavy feeling in your chest, let this be a sign. Trust that instinct. Go where you are celebrated, not where you are merely endured. Realizing that you're no longer truly welcome in a place can be painful. But what's even harder is when you're not just unwelcome, you feel like a burden. Like your presence is something others endure rather than embrace. 2. The home where you feel like a burden. There's an unmistakable feeling when you realize you're not just unwelcome, you're an inconvenience. It's in the polite but distant nod, the way someone stands near the door instead of leading you in, the hurried way they glance at the clock. They don't say it outright, but you feel it. You always do. I remember visiting an old acquaintance every now and then. At first, I ignored the signs. The stiff conversations, the lack of warmth, the way they seemed eager to move on before I even sat down. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was overanalyzing things. But one day, it became undeniable. I wasn't truly welcome. I wasn't a guest, I was an obligation. And that stung. So, I stopped visiting. And the silence that followed spoke volumes. No phone calls, no check-ins, no questions about where I had gone. That absence, that void where a friendship used to be, told me everything I needed to know. And it taught me a lesson I wish I had learned sooner. If your presence is a burden, your absence will be a relief. And that is something you should never ignore. It's funny how life shifts when you stop chasing people who don't appreciate you. The moment I stopped knocking on the wrong doors, I found the right ones opening effortlessly. Suddenly, I was surrounded by people who didn't just tolerate my company but cherished it. The difference was night and day. No forced conversations, no subtle hints that I had overstayed my welcome. Just warmth, laughter, and a genuine sense of belonging. So here's something to think about. Have you ever left someone's home feeling heavier than when you arrived? Have you ever walked away with that quiet ache in your chest, that whisper of knowing you were only there out of politeness? If so, listen to that feeling. It's telling you something important. You don't have to beg for space in someone's life. You don't have to force a connection that has already faded. Pay attention to how people make you feel. If they treat you like an afterthought, believe them. And then, with quiet confidence, walk away. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in understanding that you deserve better. Because at this stage in life, peace is worth far more than persistence. And you, my friend, deserve to be where you are wanted, not just accommodated. If you've ever felt like an obligation rather than a guest, type 1 in the comments. If you've never had to experience that, type 0. And consider yourself lucky. But sometimes, an even harder truth emerges. Not just being tolerated, but being used. Because while some people may not make you feel like a burden, they don't truly value you either. They simply need you for what you can offer. 3. The home where you are needed, not valued. There's something life teaches you, though it takes time to see it clearly. Not everyone in your life values you for who you are. Some just keep you around for what you can offer. Maybe it's your help, your time, your support. Maybe it's just the comfort of knowing you'll always pick up the phone. But when you need something, when you're the one reaching out, that's when the silence speaks the loudest. I know how easy it is to ignore that feeling. You tell yourself people are just busy, that they care, even if they don't always show it. You make excuses for them. Maybe they forgot, maybe they'll come around. And for a while, that hope keeps you holding on. I was the same way. I spent years giving, always showing up, always answering, always making sure I was there when they needed me. I told myself that's what love is, being dependable, being useful. And then, one day, I realized something. If someone only keeps you around when they need you, but disappears when you need them, that's not love. That's convenience. It took me a long time to accept that. I wanted to believe people valued me as much as I valued them. But looking back, the signs were always there. The favors disguised as friendship. The phone calls that only came with a request. The invitations that felt more like obligations. And when I stopped reaching out, the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. It's not just me who's seen this pattern. Psychologists have a term for it: transactional relationships. These are connections built on unspoken agreements. I give, you take. I help, you appreciate. But the problem with these relationships is that they're one-sided. They don't run on real care or mutual respect. They run on utility, and the moment you stop being useful, you realize just how conditional that connection really was. There's a reason so many people feel emotionally drained without knowing why. Studies have shown that imbalanced relationships lead to chronic stress and emotional exhaustion. We pour energy into people who wouldn't do the same for us, and over time, that wears us down. The worst part? We don't even notice it happening. We mistake the weight of obligation for the warmth of connection. But the truth is, love should never leave you feeling exhausted. The hardest part is deciding what to do once you see the truth. Do you keep showing up for people who wouldn't do the same for you? Do you keep hoping they'll change? Or do you finally accept that it's okay to let go of relationships that no longer serve you? I won't lie to you, walking away is hard. The fear of loneliness, of burning bridges, of second-guessing yourself, it's all real. But let me tell you what happens when you finally do it. You start finding people who want you, not just need you. People who don't just call when they need a favor, but because they miss your voice. People who make time for you, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to. And suddenly, you realize how much lighter life feels when you're surrounded by real love, not just obligation. So here's my advice. Pay attention to how people treat you when they don't need anything from you. That's where the truth is. And if you find yourself in relationships that drain you instead of filling you, it's okay to walk away. You are not a convenience. You are not just someone's backup plan. You deserve to be cherished, not just used. Because once you see the truth, you can never unsee it. And once you let go of the wrong people, you make room for the right ones. 4. The home filled with drama and negativity. There's something you learn after enough years. Peace isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. Some homes welcome you with warmth, where even the silence feels comforting. Others, they weigh on you before you even step inside. The tension is thick, the air heavy, and you know, this is not a place of rest, but of unrest. You've felt it, haven't you? That unshakable exhaustion after being around certain people. The way their words linger long after you've left. The way their negativity follows you home like an unwanted shadow. I know it all too well. There was a time when I kept returning to a house like that, hoping things would change. Sometimes, the visits started well, reminiscing about old times, sharing a rare laugh, but it never lasted. Conflict was always waiting just around the corner. A misplaced word, an innocent comment taken the wrong way, a sudden outburst that turned a peaceful moment into another battlefield. At first, I thought I could help. That my presence, my patience, my steady nature could calm the storm. But I learned, some people don't want peace. They want company in their chaos. Their battles aren't yours to fight, yet they'll pull you in if you let them. And if you're not careful, you start believing it's your responsibility to fix what was never yours to fix. Psychologists call this emotional contagion, when someone's negativity seeps into you, altering your own emotions. Studies show that prolonged exposure to conflict-driven relationships can increase stress, anxiety, and even physical health issues. And yet, many of us convince ourselves that enduring it is an act of love. That staying, absorbing, and sacrificing is what we're supposed to do. But let me tell you something. Real love does not require self-destruction. So what do? I asked myself that for years. First, I tried reasoning with them, showing them how their behavior was hurting not just me, but themselves. That only led to more arguments. Then, I tried enduring it, convincing myself that my patience would somehow fix things. But that only drained me. Eventually, I did the only thing left. I stepped away. Not in anger, not in resentment, but in acceptance that some people will never change unless they want to. And I wasn't responsible for their storms. And do you know what happened? I found peace. The kind that doesn't come with walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. The kind that lets you exhale fully, knowing you're not responsible for carrying someone else's emotional weight. And let me tell you, once you feel that kind of peace, you will never again settle for anything less. Now, maybe you're thinking, but what if it's family? What if I love them? Let me be clear. Choosing peace does not mean choosing abandonment. You can love someone and still protect yourself. You can care and still set boundaries. You can hope for their healing while refusing to drown alongside them. So here's what I ask you. When was the last time you left someone's presence feeling lighter instead of heavier? If the answer is rarely or never, then maybe it's time to ask a different question. What would my life feel like without this weight? If you've ever been caught in someone else's endless drama, drop a 1 in the comments. If you've managed to keep your peace, type 0, because that's a rare and precious thing. And remember, some people bring peace, others bring storms. The choice isn't whether or not they change. The choice is whether or not you keep standing in the rain. 5. The home where you were disrespected. Respect. Funny thing about it, you don't notice it slipping away at first. One day, you're the one people turn to for advice, for stories, for a steady hand. And then, little by little, the world shifts. Conversations speed past you like a train you didn't realize you missed. People nod, but their eyes are elsewhere. And suddenly, you're not a part of the moment. You're a background fixture. I'll never forget the day it truly hit me. I was sitting in a room full of family, a gathering just like any other. Laughter, voices overlapping, the kind of warmth that should have made me feel at home. But something was different. I was there, but not there. My words, when I found a pause long enough to offer them, landed like a feather in a storm, barely noticed before the next topic took flight. I was acknowledged, sure. A smile here, a nod there. But engaged with? No. It was like I had stepped into a space where my relevance had an expiration date, and I had long since passed it. And let me tell you, that realization doesn't just hurt, it lingers. It follows you home. It makes you question if maybe you have lost your touch, if maybe you don't belong in the center of things anymore. But that's the trick, isn't it? That's the lie we let ourselves believe. That respect is something we have to earn again, just because the world around us has changed. But I want you to hear this. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. Not one single soul. Your value isn't up for negotiation. Your stories, your thoughts, your presence, it matters. And if someone fails to see that, it is their blindness, not your inadequacy. I once read about a man named Richard, a professor of history who spent decades shaping young minds. A man who had stood in lecture halls, capturing the attention of hundreds, making the past come alive. And then, he retired. At first, he enjoyed the slower pace. But soon, he noticed something. Conversations that once lit up with curiosity now skimmed past him. Friends and even family who once sought his wisdom now offered half-hearted responses, their attention elsewhere. It wasn't that he had become less intelligent, less insightful. It was that society had subtly nudged him aside, as if his knowledge had somehow faded with time. But Richard did something that stuck with me. He didn't fight for a seat at a table that had grown indifferent to him. He found a new one. He started holding informal history talks at a local library, where people wanted to listen. He mentored young adults who valued his insights. He chose, every single day, to be where he was respected rather than tolerated. And you know what? He never looked back. That's the kind of decision we all face at some point. Whether it's in our own families, among old friends, or even within our communities, there comes a time when we have to ask ourselves, am I choosing to stay in places that make me feel invisible? And if the answer is yes, then the next question is, why? Because here's the truth. There are places where you will be heard. There are people who will lean in when you speak, who will value the depth of what you bring to the table. And it is never, never too late to find them. I promise you this. Respect isn't about age. It's about knowing your worth. And the moment you decide to stop proving yourself to the wrong people, you start finding the right ones. 6. The home that drains your mental and emotional health. There's something about certain places that lingers long after you leave. Some wrap around you like an old friend, where even the silence is comforting. Others, they drain you before you even step inside. You know the feeling, the way your shoulders tense, the way you brace yourself for whatever energy waits behind that door. Some houses don't hold warmth, they hold weight. You might have felt it before, stepping into a place where every conversation feels like a struggle. Where laughter is rare, where kindness is met with skepticism, where every word is either a complaint or a criticism. I remember that feeling well. There was someone I used to visit, someone who never had a good word to say about anything. The weather? A disaster waiting to happen. People? Untrustworthy. Life? Just a series of disappointments. And every time I sat there, I listened, hoping for a shift that never came. At first, I convinced myself it was my responsibility to stay. That being a good person meant being patient, being present. Maybe she just needed to be heard. But the more I sat there, the more I noticed something. Every visit left me feeling drained. Not just tired, but heavy, like I was carrying a burden that didn't belong to me. And for what? She never left those conversations feeling any lighter. The negativity didn't lessen, it just spread. It wasn't a conversation, it was contamination. Psychologists have a term for this: emotional contagion. It's the idea that moods, especially negative ones, are contagious. Studies show that constant exposure to pessimism and negativity can actually rewire the brain, making stress a default state. Simply put, being around constant negativity doesn't just make you feel bad, it changes you. And yet, so many of us continue to expose ourselves to it, out of obligation, out of habit, out of guilt. But here's what I've learned: self-preservation is not selfishness. There is no virtue in staying in places that leave you depleted. A home, a relationship, a friendship, these things should lift you. They won't always be perfect, but the balance matters. If the scale is always tipped toward exhaustion, then what are you really holding on to? So, I made a choice. I started saying no, softly at first, cutting visits short, redirecting conversations, and then, one day, I stopped showing up altogether. Not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of love for my own peace. And something incredible happened. Life got lighter. I found myself drawn to people who didn't see life as a battle to be lost. People who could sit in silence without filling it with complaints. People whose presence felt like sunlight after a long storm. And when I spent time with them, I didn't walk away feeling empty, I left feeling whole. If you've ever stepped out of a place feeling like you carried someone else's weight, listen to that feeling. It's telling you something important. You don't have to stay where you're only tolerated. You don't have to endure spaces that drain you. Life is too short to shrink yourself for the sake of others. If this resonates with you, type 1 in the comments. If you've never had to experience it, type 0, and I hope it stays that way. Because the truth is, some places aren't meant to be home forever. And sometimes, the best thing you can do for yourself is to step away. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring for yourself. 7. The home that no longer aligns with your growth. Funny thing about growth, it sneaks up on you. You don't notice it happening in the moment. One day, you wake up, and the places that once felt like home now feel too small. The conversations that used to spark joy feel repetitive, and the people you once leaned on don't quite understand the person you've become. It's not that anything bad happened. It's just that you changed. And suddenly, the spaces that once held you so comfortably start feeling more like cages than havens. I remember the first time I truly felt it. Sitting at a table with old friends, listening to the same stories, the same complaints, the same predictable rhythm of a conversation we'd been having for years. And I laughed at the right moments, nodded in the right places, but inside, something felt different. Like I was watching myself from the outside, trying to fit into a shape that no longer existed. It wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that they had done anything wrong. It was just that the things that used to connect us no longer did. That's the tricky part, isn't it? We think that because a relationship, whether it's friendship, family, or even a way of life, has lasted a long time, it's supposed to last forever. But longevity isn't the same as alignment. Just because someone has been part of your past doesn't always mean they're meant to be part of your future. At first, I resisted. I told myself I was overthinking, that I was being ungrateful, that growth didn't mean I had to leave behind the people who had been there for me. So I tried to shrink myself to fit. I played along. I stayed in rooms that no longer felt like mine. But the more I ignored it, the heavier it became. It was like wearing a jacket that no longer fit. Once you notice it's too tight, you can't unnotice it. And let me tell you, stepping away? Not easy. There were moments of loneliness, moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I was making a mistake. But then, something unexpected happened. I started meeting people who spoke to the person I was becoming, not just the person I used to be. People who challenged me, who opened my mind, who made me excited about conversation again. And I realized something important. The best relationships don't ask you to shrink. They invite you to expand. There's a story about a woman named Evelyn, a retired teacher who spent decades pouring wisdom into young minds. After retiring, she found herself surrounded by the same group of people she'd always known, but something felt off. Every conversation revolved around complaints, about aging, about aches and pains, about how things just weren't the same anymore. It wore on her. She still had so much curiosity, so much she wanted to learn and explore, but she felt trapped in a loop of negativity. So one day, she did something radical. She stepped out of the comfort of her old routine and joined a philosophy discussion group at the local library. She met people, young and old, who challenged her thinking, who introduced her to new ideas, who made her feel alive again. It wasn't that she didn't love her old friends. It was just that she needed something more. And instead of waiting for them to change, she changed her surroundings. That's the thing about growth. It doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. And when it does, you have a choice. Stay in spaces that no longer nourish you, or step toward something new, even if it feels uncertain. Here's the truth. Life isn't about staying in one place just because it's familiar. It's about becoming. And the right people, the ones who truly love you, will never be afraid of your growth. They'll celebrate it. They'll grow with you. And those are the ones worth holding on to. Life teaches us that not every door is worth walking through, and not every home is meant to be ours forever. Some places bring warmth, while others leave us feeling empty. And as we grow older, we realize that peace is far more valuable than persistence. If a place drains you, if a relationship makes you question your worth, then perhaps the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, is to walk away. Because here's the truth. You don't have to fight for space in someone's life. You don't have to beg to be valued. The right people will make you feel welcome without you even having to ask. And when you find those people, hold on to them. Because home isn't just a place, it's the feeling of being seen, heard, and truly cherished. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to step away from a place that no longer felt like home? If yes, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0, and I hope you never have to. And if this video resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. It helps more than you know. Thank you for spending this time with me. I appreciate you, and I hope you always find the spaces where you truly belong. Until next time, take care, stay true to yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.